Hey everyone, I just wanted to come on here and share what God's putting on my heart right now. It's a little bit different. First of all, I just want to say it's been such a good Sunday. It's been amazing. My husband and I, we just got back from church a little bit ago. We had a little bit of a longer day. We're right now in the process of rerouting into another ministry. And, even this morning, the message was about the pastor talked a little bit about, suffering and how, when you're going through things, it's important to share, with others, what God's doing even in that. However, it was worded, I can't remember necessarily word from word, but it was, speaking to me about this of, when we're going through things that are hard, when life isn't necessarily always easy, what's our response to that? How do we communicate that to others? What does that look like? Do we, put on a face and try to hide it and pretend that everything is good? Are we honest about it? Do we share, what God's doing through that, through those times of suffering, through the hard things in life? And I felt kind of convicted, when he was talking about this, because I realized that I don't always share, things that are going on that are hard until maybe years later when I'm on the, other end, and even forget some of the pieces of it. And, I do my best to testify about it. But sometimes it's better to testify when you're in it. And so I got home today, from having this just really good day, where it's hard. I'm going to be honest. It's hard to replant in another ministry, especially when you've been a part of another ministry for so long. To start over isn't easy. And that's why, it's not recommended to replant often. Sometimes it's necessary. And the Lord, definitely will call people, to move on at times. And that's normal. That's part of life. That's even really a part of the Great Commission. Go out into all the world and preach the gospel to the lost. And, sometimes we stay in one house for a long time. Or many, many years, whatever. And the going is, in your place of work, it's in your business, it's in the local community. And sometimes the going means actually physically moving into a different congregation, into a different church. And that's also, part of the Great Commission. And so we have to acknowledge that. We can't, look at replanting as always being a bad thing. It's going to happen. And, my husband and I, we try to do it as little as possible. When we first met, we were in that church for a very long time. That's actually where we met, was in that church, the first church that we were a part of. And it's where we, ended up getting married and, again, building this amazing community. And then we were a part of a church plant for 7 years after that. And so, yeah, we're starting over. That's what this year's been about, is starting over. And with that, it's also been hard. It's not easy to rebuild community. And as much as you want to maintain and keep people from previous seasons of life, sometimes that doesn't work out the way that you want it to. And even then, sometimes relationships just change. And there's a grieving that can come with that. So, yeah. But as I'm sitting up here, I'm actually up in my upper room right now. It's like a bonus space. And before I came up here, because this is where I usually come to have alone time with the Lord, this is where I come to pray when I can. Most of the time, I end up praying on the couch with my baby when she's napping or something like that. But when I can get alone, I come up here to pray. So I'm up here. But before coming up here, the Lord said, go out to the backyard. And I'm like, okay. And so I'm thinking that I'm going to just go sit quietly in my backyard and I'm going to pray and I'm going to just talk to the Lord. And I go out there and I hear all this construction. And, my neighbors on the other side of us, they're actually building a house on their additional property. So what used to be just extra yard space for them, there's now a giant house there. And I go out there and, I can see that there's a bunch of people out there working, there's a bunch of noise, and I'm like, man, like this isn't private. There's no privacy out here. I don't feel like I can just stand out here and pray, especially since I pray out loud. That would be kind of weird. I feel like there's so many people around that are like able to hear me and see what I'm doing. I just don't really feel comfortable with this. And, there's a difference between praying corporately and then you're just trying to be alone with the Lord. You want that to be private. So, I just stand out there for a minute, walk around my yard and go, okay, God, cool. This was great. I'm going to go back inside. And, I go back upstairs and I look out the window down to where the house is being built. And then I remember before this house was built, and this is where it actually kind of starts and where I realize that the process of this house being built right now closely even aligns with what God's doing in my life right now. It's so funny. So back in January, my husband and we had just left our previous ministry. I felt like the Lord was calling us on. And so we wanted to take time as a family to just pray and, fast and seek the Lord for the first part of the year. And one of the things that he put on my heart to do was to do some decluttering in our house with the help of my husband. Because I honestly have been kind of a pack rat, kind of like a hoarder, not like extreme, but I was holding on to a lot of stuff that I didn't need to hold on to anymore. And so we decided to do that as a family. And the first weekend that we did that, there was like an air stagnation warning because the air quality was kind of like, there wasn't really like a lot of like movement. So when that happens, they advise to not do like any burning or any, you should not really do any burning because it just kind of sits. Any of the pollutants just kind of sit in the air. They don't really move when there's air stagnation. And so I saw that on my phone. I knew that there was an advisory for that. And we start, going through our upstairs space and getting rid of stuff. And the same time that we're doing that, no joke, my neighbors are burning. They have big piles in this property. They're just burning all this stuff. And I was so frustrated because, well, first of all, I do have, I don't want to speak it over myself, but in the past I've struggled with asthma. And so I do have to be careful. So smelling the smoke and dealing with that was really, really frustrating for me. I was like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? There is a warning that we're not supposed to be burning right now because the air quality is poor and you guys are going to be burning all this stuff. And this isn't something that is like out of the ordinary. I've, experienced this before with my neighbors where they just, have, I don't know, a bunch of wood to get rid of or something. So they do a bunch of burning. But I was just really bothered by it. And I remember one of my friends saying, what if it's prophetic? What if them burning is prophetic to what God's doing with you? And I was like, yeah, it's possible. It's definitely possible. Sure. And at the time, we didn't know that they were going to build a house. We didn't know that they were getting ready to actually build a house on that property. What it looked like to us is them just kind of cleaning up their property, was them preparing to build a house. That is so crazy. So this is back in January. So my husband and I, what we're doing in our house is we're decluttering. I'm getting rid of a bunch of stuff. I had, a bunch of daycare stuff still that I was holding on to, just in case. I had stuff from being a kids pastor that I was holding on to for just in case. I had a bunch of like homeschooling stuff from when I used to, help parents with homeschooling their kids, just in case. I had all this just in case stuff. And what was interesting about it is that it was from an old season. And I wasn't ready. I wasn't willing to let go of that old season yet. And I had to wrestle that out with God and surrender that to him and say, okay, at the end of the day, if I ever decided to open a daycare again, how hard would it be to replace this stuff? It was the silliest thing because I found out that when I looked at it, when I really processed it, I found out that a lot of the stuff that I had was stuff that I got at like a garage sale right when I opened my daycare. like a couple weekends before I opened my daycare, there was a closing daycare sale in my town, and I got a bunch of the stuff for like $20. So I have all this stuff up in my bonus room that's just taking up space. It's cluttery. It wasn't pleasant to be up here. I couldn't sit here and just enjoy it like I am now. And yet I'm just holding on to it. It doesn't really have any value. But for some reason I couldn't part ways with it. And actually I still have a couple toys right here that I wasn't willing to get rid of at the time. Thought that maybe I'd use for my daughter. And the Lord was even telling me while I was sitting here, he's like, are you ready to get rid of them? I'm like, okay, Lord, I'll get rid of them. So it's something that I, actively struggle with the Lord. And it's because to me, items have memories. Items have, I feel like there's like this emotional attachment to stuff. And then some of it is maybe like that insecurity of, well, what if I need it again? And so it's something that God and I have, wrestled out a little bit. I have to like work on that actively. But my husband and I were doing that, and he was really helping me. He was really pushing me to, just be comfortable letting go of things from the past, letting go of things that no longer fit this season of our life and may not fit future seasons of our life. So why are we going to hold on to it? And again, at the same time, my neighbors are burning stuff that they don't need either. So for us, like, we're just sending, vans of stuff to Goodwill or the thrift store, down the road, and they're burning it. But they're doing the same thing that we're doing. They're preparing for what's next. For us, it was preparing so that we could use this space again, and not have it just be storage. It was us preparing and saying, God, like, we want to be prepared for the next season and whatever that looks like. So we're both in this spot of preparation. So yeah. But this year's been a huge testing year for me. Having the biggest blessing ever of having my daughter, like, that is amazing. My husband and I waited years to have our baby. She's our miracle baby. We couldn't have children until we had her. So it wasn't like we were waiting. We were waiting on the Lord, and his timing, but it wasn't necessarily, what our timing would have been if we had if it was our choice. So, the biggest blessing this year, but in the midst of the biggest blessing, a lot of change, where it just feels like our whole world was just kind of flipped upside down, in ways that I didn't expect. I didn't expect to uproot at the end of last year, from our church that we were a part of for so long, and our church family that we were a part of for so long. I didn't expect that. I wasn't asking the Lord for that. I wasn't asking the Lord. I guess I wasn't expecting to, after having my daughter, like, trade in everything that I was doing before having her. I honestly thought that I was going to continue to do everything that I did before having her, and that she was going to be an addition to that. And so after having my daughter, the Lord had me surrender, working outside the home. He had me surrender, being a supervisor for Head Start. He had me surrender being a children's pastor. He had me, like, lay that all down at the altar and just focus on being a mom. So that was a huge shift for me, to go from, being busy all the time and, doing all these different things and being all these, showing up for other people, at these capacities that I was showing up for them, to then just being Emmy, the mother to America. And that's it. That's my only job right now, is to be her mom, and of course to be a wife. And it's like, whoa, that is like such a huge change. And in the midst of that, I feel like our community shifted a lot. There's people that are no longer in our lives anymore that we love so much, but they're just not in our lives anymore. And then we have people that throughout this year that God's brought back into our lives, and it's been so beautiful, so beautiful. And then right now, we're getting to know new people that we've never met before. We're building a new community, and it's so exciting. And so, the Lord was just showing me today, as I went outside and I looked at this house and I saw the progress that was happening, the foundations on it, the floorboards are on, The framing's all done. The roof is on. The windows are on. You know, they have the plastic wrap around it right now. They're getting ready to do some siding. And right now they're working on the inside of the house, and they're adding more to the inside, like electrical and plumbing and, you know, I'm sure all that stuff that comes with the inside of the house. So they just keep adding more and more to it every day. And, you know, as I was looking at this house, I was really thinking, like, wow, Lord, like, this is like my year. This is literally like my year. I've had to surrender everything to you this year. And I feel like I'm starting over. I feel like I'm starting over in so many ways. And, you know, starting with the beginning of the year of just saying, we're just going to start the year as a family. And we're going to just take time to pray and be with the Lord. I feel like during that time period, that's what was happening is he had to burn things up in us. He had to we had to get rid of things, whether it be, you know, physical items or like old mindsets, old ideas, old beliefs, things that no longer could go with us into the new season. We had to clear the ground, if you will. We had to make room. You know, another thing that they had to do on their property, they did it, I think, like 2 weekends in a row. So they were burning stuff, and then they had to get rid of the trees. They had trees on their property that they no longer needed. They couldn't put a foundation on that property until they got rid of the trees. So I could see them from my house. Not like I'm a stalker or anything, but, you know, I just was curious, like, what's going on back there? So, you know, every once in a while I'd peek through my window. And yeah, they had to dig out these trees. They had to dig out the roots. They had to dig it all out and burn it completely. They wanted to make sure that there were no more roots left on that ground before they dug it up more and put the foundation in. Because obviously that could be damaging to the foundation that they're trying to build if there's old roots in the way. And so I feel like that's so much like what God was doing in my life. That's so much like what he was doing in my heart. You know, during that 90-day window that my husband and I were just home and not really doing much, not really hanging out with many people, not going to church yet. We are waiting. We were doing online church while we were waiting to hear the Lord for, you know, where he'd want us to go after. He was digging up all the old roots. He was, you know, clearing the way to build a completely new foundation for us to build upon this year. And it's been such a process, such a process. You know, really, like at the beginning of the year, I laid everything before the Lord. I said, God, show me what I don't know. And what I think I know, count it all as dung right now, like Paul says. I just count it all as dung. I know nothing. Teach me, God. Let's start over. Let's start from the beginning. Let's go back through the Bible again, which, you know, I'm constantly in the Word. But even then, you know, like, God, let's restudy some scripture here. Let's ask some questions. I have some questions, God. You know, what do you really say about this? You know, what's your heart for the church? What's your vision for the church? What do you say about this, God? And we just went deep. We went so deep. And, you know, through that place with the Lord, and even through like grief of like, God, this isn't this year, and this season isn't what I thought it would be. I thought that, you know, it would look a lot different after having my daughter. I wasn't expecting to have so many changes that happened in my life. I wasn't expecting to lose so many people that were close to me. I wasn't expecting to be so spread out, even for my brothers and sisters that I love so very much, you know, because now, like, you know, just in this season, my community, my friends, my family, everybody's just spread out. We're united, but we're spread out. You know, and even just speaking from like a ministry standpoint, I'm talking about my brothers and sisters that I once served with in church, that I once did life with, that I once did, you know, ministry with and broke bread with week in and week out. Everybody's spread out because God's so good. People are starting churches. People are starting their own ministries. People are moving to different states. And so, you know, we were once like under one covering, under, you know, one roof and doing life together. And now we're all spread out. And so, again, just all these changes that have happened after I had my daughter, I wasn't expecting it to be like that. And it's really challenged me. I was always expecting to be, you know, with these people that I was once laboring with, that we'd always just be so closely together, like even just physically. And so, yeah, it's just been a very challenging year, but it's been a good year in that, in the, in the pain and the grieving of that, of having to, like, that was, I would say, like, that's the biggest thing, is I had to grieve how I thought that my life would be when I had children, how I thought that my community would be when I had children. And so, yeah, God challenged me to that. He challenged me with that. I'm sure that with that came many idols, unhealthy idols that God had me just lay down at the altar, things that he had to, burn away and burn off me, so that he could really do a new thing in me. And so as I sit here today and as I look at this house that's being built and I see the progress that's happening, the Lord is just speaking to me and he's saying, Emmy, this is what I'm doing in you. I'm rebuilding you. You're not finished yet, but you're in progress. And I really feel that. I really, really feel that. I'm saying everything a little bit more optimistically, but it's been a really hard year. Going through a ton of changes postpartum is not easy and not recommended. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. I would never recommend to reroute church-wise right after having a baby. I wouldn't recommend that. But that's what the Lord wanted to do this year with my husband and I. And it was a hard thing. And so, through the hard thing, he's building something new, and it's beautiful. And I look forward to, the rest of this year. I look forward to looking back on this year and saying, wow, God, thank you for everything that you did. Thank you for everything that you built in my life. Thank you for things that you had me surrender to you, that you had me get rid of. Thank you, God, for, showing me how to clear the way so that you could build a new foundation in me, so that you could do a new thing in me. So, yeah, like, that was just what's on my heart to share. Just being vulnerable, being honest. That in the midst of all the suffering, all the pain that I've gone through this year, there's been so much joy. Obviously, having my daughter, biggest blessing ever. But yeah, there's joy. There's joy in the Lord. And that's, something else that, my pastor is preaching about right now is joy. Happiness is so temporary, and that's one thing that I've learned this year, is that happiness, it is so temporary. It's just an emotion. But joy is something that only God can give you. It's supernatural. It's from him. And yeah, because that's actually the sermon series that my pastor is doing right now. It's on joy, and he's preaching out of the book of Philippians, and it's really good. It's really ministering to me. It's really blessing me. But having our daughter, her middle name is Joy. And she's a worshiper. She's a praiser. And I remember, I think she was about 4 months old. There'd be times that, I'd be changing her, or I'd have to put her down for a second or something like that. And she would get really fussy, and she would start crying. And the only thing that would make her stop crying in those moments is singing to her. And so I would be singing to her constantly. I would be singing joy down in my heart over and over again. I've got the joy down in my heart. And there were times that I was singing that, and I was talking to the Lord, and I was like, God, I don't really feel like I have joy right now. But it's really funny that you're having me sing this. Because I know that as I'm singing, about having joy in my heart, even though I'm not feeling the joy right now, I'm feeling grief, I'm feeling sorrow, I'm feeling discouragement, whatever it is that I was feeling, I know that the truth is that I have joy in my heart. So as I'm singing to my baby Joy about having joy in my heart to stay, I know that it can be true. And I knew that even singing that to my daughter constantly throughout this year, I knew that was like my anthem over the year. I knew that was my prophecy over the year. Is that no matter how it looks, no matter how discouraged I feel, no matter how sad I feel, I still have joy in my heart. And, you know, even I would say more so now am I starting to actually feel it more tangibly. Is how I would say it's like more of a tangible feeling now where I can say, yes, I have the joy and I feel the joy. But for a lot of the year, I didn't feel the joy. I would say temporary moments of happiness, you know, the joy of having my daughter, but like for the most part, I was feeling pretty discouraged. And so, yeah, I'm really thankful that my pastor's preaching on joy right now. I'm really thankful, you know, that the Lord's taking me deeper in it. And, you know, I'm thankful that he had me declare that song for this entire year. Because, yeah, as he's rebuilding me, like this next door house is being rebuilt, he's doing a deeper work in me to where no matter what I go through, no matter what life brings, I can still have joy.